designers. We want to pick up where we left off in the second section of our video tutorial of how to put together a basic car shape. In this case, our car is the MK1 Austin-Healey Sprite, and we had just placed this object to sit in this little indentation where we're going to create the headlamp. And we're just going to check our resource photos for just a second. We see here in the resource photos that the original car had a pretty marked indentation right here where the headlamp would sit, that the headlamp itself had a couple component parts. It had the main shell, it then had this ridge here made out of chrome or steel, probably steel, and then we had this headlamp section which is one shape that would just be defined in here, and then we also have this exterior piece. We also get a little bit more information about the front of the grille. The grille itself sits inside an indentation in the front of the car, and it also has this little tail pointing towards that main badge. We also see the headlight portion right in here, or rather the turn signals, and they pull out just a little bit. And there's also an opening that sits right behind them, which we can see in this view, which is just a reconstructed shell of a Sprite. Having seen those views, it gives us a better idea of the kind of shapes we're going to need to create to get this model looking more accurate. So what I can do is I can start to build a little bit more of that shape, and I can do that by selecting some of these edges that are going to be around the main frog lamp here. It's called the frog eye or the bug eye. Once we have a little bit more structure, then when we move these components down, we can do it from either side because it is mirrored. We can accommodate now that headlamp shape. And we're definitely getting a little bit closer. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm going to distort the top of the car, this top shell portion, rather than the headlamp. And if I'm affecting the geometry a little bit too much, if there's pinching, I'm not going to worry about that too much at this point. Still focusing on the overall structure. Looks like I might have missed an area right in here. Let me just zoom in. We can see in this front section, I missed one segment here, which we can create pretty easily. I just cut those two sides. I want to make sure I grab the right points, and that'll give us more of an indentation. It's more semicircular, and I can continue to work on that to refine it. At a stage like this, I can start to use our brush. Go into our brush editor, set on flatten. I'm just going to switch it to smooth. I'm just going to use the preset, make it a slightly smaller brush, 33 radius, reduce the strength. I'd rather make smaller strokes, and you can see that as I'm doing this, right along the edge, it helps me round the front of that headlamp opening. Because this is a mirrored object, it's going to happen on both sides of the x-axis. And I can also use that to smooth out any areas in this front as I approach the grille. As I'm working on the geometry of the main chassis, I also want to pay attention to the headlamp itself, because eventually these two pieces are going to fit together pretty closely. So I want to concentrate just a little bit on these pieces, making sure they look a little closer. And I'm just selecting the loop and making it a little bit smaller using the universal manipulator. To give me a better sense how that should be. Now I don't want to distort it too much, so I might want to just extrude a little bit further and then pull that down. Once I get a shape I like, I'll subdivide it just a little bit more, and I'll bounce back and forth between the hood of the car and the headlamp so I get a better fit. At this point, I may want to take this front edge, cut it off, or what I could choose to do, I can extrude all of these edges once they're selected. And continue to extrude to get that chrome shape. That rounds towards the front of the lamp. Extrude in and push that forward just slightly, and select the back edge. Extrude that as well, but then pinch it in just a touch. And that way we have these two shapes that will interlock to one another, and we've guaranteed that they're going to be accurate because we borrowed the shape one from the other. And I gave myself a little bit of room to make further manipulations. I'm going to extrude again. Just pull this in just a little bit, and then extrude one more time and pull it forward. That's going to give me a nice shape for this headlamp. When I have two pieces like that are lined up, and I like the way that they're manipulated, I'm fairly confident that I'm not going to make major changes to them. I'll want to just take those and mirror them just like I did with the tires across our x-axis. That way we have both objects on either side. They're actually one object. Each of these shares parts on either axis, so we could stretch it out. Wouldn't be a good thing there. Sometimes as I'm building an object, it's difficult for me to see which object is which. Have I already connected these? I'll often create just some base materials. Let's call this one red. Select a color. I'm just going to apply that. At this point I don't worry about making it very dark or light. I just want a ballpark. I'm not going to worry too much about the shininess. I may do this for the main body as well, or some component piece. But here now I can tell pretty quickly that these are two separate objects without going into my scene editor. And in my scene editor, light place, might want to make that a more descriptive line like headlamp, and we don't want that to be generic. Headlamp rim, be a good fit. And we can use the interior of this edge to create the front of our headlamp, or we can take this outer edge, cut and paste those, move them forward. Then we just have to extrude the remaining edges, pull it forward slightly. We should still build internal structure to that, but that's going to give us most of what we're going to need. And as you approach the inside of your circle, you want to just merge that. And that way, if I want to pull it forward or back, all I have to do is pull that center point. If I want to adjust any of these, You can do so pretty easily by selecting the entire loop. Personal preference on an object like this is I'm going to use display mode ghosted shade, so it mimics glass. You do have to remember to mirror that across our x-axis. So there we have the headlamps looking a little better. For the turn signal component, let's go back into our scene editor and turn off our tires. View in the front here. Take these tire views, switch those to ghosted shade, and do the same with our back tires so I can see a little more clearly. Our main body, switch that to ghosted shade. The area that I'm focusing on now is going to be where the turn signal will be. So I select the point where I want to have the center of this opening. Shift out to a perspective view so I can see a little more clearly. I'm going to use B to bevel. Because I'm beveling around the center axis, or a point that's revolving around the center axis, my bevel control is actually going to be at the origin, or at least the origin for X. So use that to make a circle the size that I want, and I can shift my views while I'm doing that. Once I have it just where I want it, I'm going to hit return. And I don't want this face, so I'm going to delete it. Or what I could choose to do is extrude it, and that'll allow me to create that geometry of pushing out just a little bit. And also is a nice shortcut for indicating where I need to create some more edges. And that's here along the outer edges. When you're in ghosted shade mode, you can select through the object, which is sometimes convenient. Sometimes it causes problems like that. I selected all the way through the back. I don't want that. I'm just going to reselect, be a little more careful this time. Now each of those needs to be linked to the outer edge. I'm using bridge, or connect rather, not bridge. Bridge would connect two polygons that are completely separated. And in this method, and we'll switch back to our fast shade mode or smooth shade mode. Now we have those apertures that we wanted on the front of the car. We're getting more structure. And for the grille, we want this to be more of an indentation in the opposite direction. So what we can do is extrude that. Notice this is affecting our edge tension. We can extrude again to get us more what we're looking for. If we go to our side view, zoom in more. You notice we do have these door panels we're going to want to cut out. If I like how we've been progressing in the overall shape, move that forward just a little bit. We're pretty close to the way I'd like these doors to be. And if we do find ourselves at a point where we could separate these, I could just mark them to cut away for later. Many times what I'll do is I'll just tag that area. Now, material isn't going to affect both sides, but that's alright because it's still selecting both those areas. And what I can do, I'm going to verify, switch that side mode again. Selecting the object once again and switching back to smooth shade mode. I can select just the areas that I want to remove, and I want to remove these on both sides. Just Control B, and those are going to cut away using break. Once I've done so, these areas are a separate object that can move completely out of the way. And the reason why I waited to do that is because I wanted to get the overall continuity of the body of the car before I pulled those components out. Once these areas, like the doors, are separated, it's easier to make extrusions that will define those as edges. And I could just take all of these edges, these outer edges of the door, and then I could make extrusions, push that back so that there's actually a seam in between there, and I could continue to extrude and then just define that a little bit later on. But you notice we have a nice interior edge there of the door. I tend to make a little more geometry than I need. That way if I decide later on I need to get rid of it, I can. But I'd rather have it and not need it. For the front grille area, once I have a loop that I like that defines this sort of smiling mouth, and one of the reasons I concentrate on making it as a loop is then it's pretty easy to select the entire thing. I can cut and paste it, or I could take just a small portion, maybe this interior loop, which is just this section right in here, just along the edge, and I could select that loop. You can see it better from that angle. I can cut and paste this. I could then just take the outside edge, make sure I have the outside edge, make an extrusion. You can see it from the side. Extrude a little further. This time I'm just going to push it up a bit. Extrude again. Push it back. I think we need to be a little bit larger here to fit what's on the model. And that'll give us our basic shape. This is another case where it's going to be kind of hard to see what's going on here. This shape and how it interacts with the other. So I'm going to create another material. I'm just going to call it dark. Nothing fancy for now. Sure, it is pretty dark. I'm going to apply that. It gives me a better idea of how these shapes are going to interact, and then I can start to adjust. May want to push back portions of my chassis to allow that grille to fit a little bit better. My original model, or the source photos rather, there seemed to be a little bit more distance between the two of these, the front grille. I like to work this way interactively, between the two objects, and make sure that there is a relationship between the two, rather than focusing on one or the other. Work on both parts simultaneously. And we could also concentrate a little bit more on this upper edge. May want this. May want the entire piece to extrude one more time, just so we can push it back a little bit. When you do that, notice that I've now affected the overall geometry. I've got this whole ring, this outer ring, so I'll need to apply that material again, and that's working a little bit better. The section up on top, on the resource photos in the grill, just zoom in a little bit more, there was a little indentation that went directly up in this section, so we're going to need to create more geometry to allow for that. So what I want to do is, I don't need this for now, I'm just going to turn it into wireframe. Just going to take all these edges, And I need to be careful here that I make sure symmetry mode is turned on. I do want it to be affected on both axes, and when you're creating new geometry that you're borrowing from other parts, you always need to remember if you do have a symmetrical object or if you want the new object to be symmetrical. Sorry, I lost my selection there. You need to turn that symmetry back on. I'm going to cut this edge. And then I can take this section here. It looks like I can do a little more cutting. And why I'm doing this is I just want to take this portion, just this edge, and start to bend it up and pull it back. To give us more of the detail that we were looking for from the original. And I can continue to work that, make it more accurate to the original model. Again, working with the separate pieces, I should really shift this back to smooth shade so I have a better idea. I'm going to need that to line up a little better. This whole top edge is going to need to pull forward, or actually pull back towards the car itself. All of these just need to shift back just a little bit. That could use a little refinement, but it gives us the general structure. For an area like the windshield, I could again borrow geometry from the main chassis. And the windshield is going to have some curvature. We can see from this view it's going to pull up and away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab just the geometry right in here. Make sure that I'm lined up in all my views. Didn't want to rotate that view. Swing it back. Just swing it outside the plane. It'll allow you to come back. It's hard to see in that view, so I'm going to shift back to here. Just going to go ahead and cut and paste. I made a little mistake there. I really should have extended it all the way down, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Again, I forgot I was in mirror mode. I'm going to cut and paste. First thing I want to do is turn symmetry on for this object. Select the entire object. I want it to have some thickness. That's not bad right there. Just to be sure, let's try to extrude it. Get back in that side view. Just pull it into place. That's much better. It's not going to be over thick. And let's go ahead and subdivide it. It's going to give us a decent shape. Now I do notice that I'm in symmetrical mode here. When I'm clicking on one side, the other side is reflecting that change. I'm going to go ahead and split that. That'll give me more control over these bottom edges. I can then take that and pull it out to reflect the curvature in my source photos. I could do the same to this center line. Pull it forward just a little bit. Get some of that curvature. And I want to make some of these edits right off the bat, just so I don't get too far into building this without being accurate to the model or accurate to the source photos. When I get further to the edge, I can just pull that edge. Let's frame our selection. That's not a bad start. Yeah, because I do have a very slight edge on the windshield, I could actually take this piece and then extrude that to make the outer rim. And just like with the headlamps, I'm going to switch this to ghost shade mode. I can see right through it. It makes me feel like it's glass. And some of these areas aren't going to be accurate loops. What I like to do in this stage is also to develop more structure to the inside of the car. So I may go ahead and create car doors for the inside of the car doors and develop more of the interior structure of the car. Depends on how much you need to show. If you don't need to build the inside of the car, then don't do it. If you're not going to show the inside of the car, there's really no reason. You could even put a coupe or a hardtop on this so we don't see any of that. You know, from this angle you wouldn't see the interior of the car. But if I did want to build some interior items like, say like seats, I would probably do it, I want to mirror a seat across the x-axis if you're going to have a seat on one side and the other. But I want more control over creating the original geometry for the seat, and for that I want to use mirror controls. I've jumped ahead a little bit to describe the way I would do this. The reason why I mention it as mirror technique is I'm mirrored around my x-axis here, and I would start to build the seat in this way. And however much definition I want to create in the seat, I just want to make sure that I do have my symmetry mode turned on. And I can start to define some more structure, maybe have it dip down a little bit. Maybe these areas were extruded. Or maybe there's indentations along the side. But once I had a seat that I liked, what I could then do is move it off the axis and mirror the object across the x-axis, and then I have two seats. Now I need to have it the way I want it, because if I start adjusting my X controls for size, it's going to affect both of them at the same time. So I do want to make sure I have this lined up as far away from the other seat as I'd like it to be in the final car. And this would give me two seats that would work for my Healey sprite.